The Los Angeles Rams improved their win-loss record to 2-0 after a weird victory over the Indianapolis Colts in Week 2 by a score of 27-24. Who stood out in this game? What happened? We're going to break it all down on this episode of the Locked On Rams podcast.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rams Nation, what is going on? As always, it is your boy, your host, Sosa Kremenjas. I'm a fantasy analyst at PFF and your host here at the Locked On Rams podcast, your number one daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Rams and part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, in this episode, we're going to go throughout this game recap between the Rams and the Colts game in Week 2. The Rams, of course, won this game by a score of 27-24, improving their record to 2-0. But before we get to that, I just wanted to remind you guys quickly that the Locked On NFL Draft podcast is officially relaunching on September 20th with two new hosts, Eric Crocker of the Locked On 49ers podcast, who is going to bring the player scouting, and Ryan Tracy of the Locked On Chiefs podcast, who's going to bring the analytical side. You guys can all go check that out on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast on YouTube, the Odyssey app, or wherever you get your podcasts. Rams fans, you're probably not going to want to check that out all too often, at least not yet, because this team looks like they could be a Super Bowl contender. And not only that, but they don't have a first-round pick. So we'll wait for that maybe down the line a little bit here. But, of course, they're going to break down all the prospects that you guys want to know about. So check them out if you want. Now we can turn into this game here. And this was a strange game. I mean, of course, the Rams came out of it victorious by a score of 27-24, probably a little bit tighter than most people would have liked. And of course, I also took the L on the betting line. I did say on the podcast last week, my prediction was going to be 31-28 for the Rams, and the betting line was the Rams as the favorite by 3.5. And I took the Rams to cover that, which they did not. So don't feel so smart for not even listening to my own suggestion last week on the prediction. But looking at this game, we could break it down offensively, defensively, special teams. On the offensive side of the ball, I mean, you look at Matthew Stafford, 19 for 30, 278 passing yards, 9.3 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, an interception, 1 sack, 101.8 rating. He had a decent game in this one. Now, the interception may or may not have been a tip pass. I didn't get a good look at it. Jonathan Vilma, I believe it was, on the broadcast call said it was tipped, but I got the replay and it did not look like it was tipped. I think the ball just sort of sailed on him. He was throwing it across the middle of the field there. I want to say he was targeting Cooper Kupp, maybe Tyler Higbee, and it just kind of got a little bit too high and got away from him, and it landed right in the lap of a safety. So unfortunate for him to get that first interception, but it was good to get that one out of the way. You know, we can kind of get back into what I said on Twitter. We all kind of needed this humbling, I felt like. You know, we were talking about how this offense is the best and the Rams look like they're the best team and this and that. Sometimes you got to have a mistake and you got to see how the team is going to respond and rebound. And I'm really impressed with how they did that in this game, because this game was sort of a back and forth, and we're going to get into all of what happened and how it unfolded. But offensively, they were pretty good, you know, and that is the focal point always, is the passing game and Stafford himself. And in this game, he was solid. I don't think you can really be too upset with how he performed. It maybe wasn't his best performance either, but at the same time, he did not put this team in a position to lose. Actually, he did the complete opposite and put them in a position to win, leading a fourth quarter comeback. That's another one to his record, which I believe he has the most in NFL history. And we're going to dive into another interesting stat just a bit later on in this episode. But moving on throughout the rest of this offense, you know, you look at Darrell Henderson, once again, the lead back, 13 carries, 53 yards. Unfortunately for him, though, he did get hurt later in that game. I want to say maybe somewhere in the third or fourth quarter. And from there on out, it was the Sony Michel show. And he got a lot of work to end that game out. 10 carries, 46 yards for him, rushing as well. And Darrell Henderson did have a rushing touchdown to boot. So quite a good performance from both of these guys. It looked like it was going to be the Henderson show pretty much 100% of the time again, up until the injury, which we don't really know what it was. I don't know exactly what he injured, but it didn't look too bad per se, though he was, you know, walking right into the tunnel. So it looked like he wasn't going to come back by any means necessary. In terms of the actual severity, don't know. It wasn't anything like a knee injury and he got carted off or anything like that. Could have just been something somewhat minor, maybe somewhat, you know, a week or two, that kind of thing. But at the same time, we don't really want to speculate on that. So it's really hard to say. In terms of how the running game looked, though, they looked really solid in my opinion. I mean, the offensive line was doing a very good job at run blocking. they are really powerful. I mean, they were creating some big gaps up front, and both Henderson and Michel to end out that game got a lot of space to run the ball. The Rams just didn't run it that often. So, in terms of the running game production, very solid. Moving into the receiver core here, the tight ends, all the guys that make the receptions in the passing game. How much love can you give to Cooper Kupp? It's never going to be enough. This guy, 9 receptions, 163 yards receiving, and 2 touchdowns. The first one, he's lined up to Matthew Stafford's left, coming out of the backfield, runs a simple seam route just right up the gut, catches a touchdown. He's wide open. Then he sets up the game-winning field goal, I want to say, or the game-winning drive, where he catches a 44-yard pass, I believe it was, and puts the Rams in position to actually put points on the board again. And the other touchdown, the second touchdown, this guy is so impressive. I mean, he was dominating all game. He was pretty much open the entire game. It's so clear that Matthew Stafford and Kupp have this very strong connection like Goff and Kupp used to have. And he looks like the clear-cut number 1 receiver on the team right now. And I know that the Rams are a team that doesn't really look like that in a week-to-week performance. Every single week, someone else is going to step up. But right now, Kupp, with how he's performed throughout these first 2 games, it looks like Stafford has built the most chemistry with him, and they just look the most comfortable together. And Kupp looks like he could have his first Pro Bowl season in the NFL, which would be awesome, of course, for him personally. But in terms of the production, he looks like the same old player, just an incredibly talented and special player by any metric or by any statistic. The guy is awesome. The rest of the receiver core, a little bit up and down. Robert Woods just doesn't look that comfortable in this game just yet, or in this season. 9 targets, 5 receptions, 64 receiving yards. But I want to say he had 2 drop passes, very uncharacteristic of him, of course. We know this guy has some of the best hands in the league. You look at Darrell Henderson, 3 receptions, 29 yards, 5 targets, another drop as well. Not the best performance by him either, but very solid. So, I would say he had a nice contribution in the passing game and looks like a guy that is a legitimate 3-down back. And by the way, his pass protection, Darrell Henderson, was incredible. I mean, this guy is all about pass protection. I respect him so much for how willing he is to stick his nose into the A-gap or in these gaps with blitzing linebackers and defensive linemen coming at him. They have so much more weight than he does, and he just stonewalls them, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then the rest of the guys, Van Jefferson, 3 targets, 1 reception, only 14 yards, a drop pass as well, which was on a key 3rd and long. Tyler Higbee, only 1 catch for 8 yards, which was a 3rd down catch, and it converted the chains, of course, which was good, but not that much of a contribution from these guys. They were relatively quiet in this game. Outside of Cooper Kupp, of course, Robert Woods still put together a decent game. 64 yards receiving is not bad, but in terms of the actual in-game production, it could have been a lot better, because we've seen a lot better from Woods, and he doesn't prototypically drop, these passes that he dropped in this game, and they would have been pretty big catches and pretty big receptions for 10 to 15, maybe 20 yards, depending on how many yards he could have created after the catch. Now, the offensive line, their performance was absolutely awesome in this game. We're going to dive into that in just a second and talk about how they held up in pass pro as well as that running game. And of course, you guys can always come connect with us on Twitter at QB's MVP, at Locked On Rams, and on YouTube at Locked On Rams. But I want to tell you about this sponsor. There is an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about. It's called Get Upside. My listeners are making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Use the promo code touchdown for NFL or baseball for MLB and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. All you have to do, just download the app for free and use the promo code touchdown for NFL and baseball for MLB to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people obviously drive a lot more than others. You're probably going to want to utilize this if you can, and I'm pretty sure that you should at least take a look. Just download for free, Get Upside, the app. Use the promo code touchdown for NFL, baseball for MLB to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code touchdown or baseball. And now we can dive into some of this offensive line play, because I felt like these guys obviously are going to play an important role in every single game, not just this one, but they were very solid in this game. I mean, especially early in the contest, there was a lot of clean pockets for Matthew Stafford to work in. He had the ability to either step up in these pockets, maneuver inside of them, leave the pocket and even go stretch that out with his mobility a little bit. They were great. I mean, they were giving him very clean pockets. Some of those in, 5 wide with 5 wide receivers, no running back there, 4 receivers and a running back there. Like I mentioned in the first segment, Henderson stepping up, stonewalling defenders. There was at least 3, maybe 4 snaps that I saw him in pass pro where he just did literally the perfect job. You could not have played it any better. And then you look at these guys here, the offensive linemen. I'm using these numbers from PFF, which they may change a little bit based on, how these grades work out here. But you look at the pressures allowed. Left guard David Edwards with the most, 3 pressures on the team. Andrew Whitworth, 3 pressures allowed himself. Austin Corbett, the right guard, 2 pressures. Center Brian Allen, 1. Sony Michel, the running back, 1. And right tackle Rob Havenstein with 1 pressure allowed as well. And the team did allow 2 sacks as well, 1 from Brian Allen, the center, 1 from Andrew Whitworth, left tackle. So not the best performance when you look at these statistics, but in terms of how often the Rams were throwing the ball this game and how they actually allowed Matthew Stafford to get a lot of time for most of these opportunities, I thought they did a really solid job. And then you look at, obviously, Darrell Henderson, 50 yards rushing. Sony Michel, nearly 50 yards rushing as well, averaging 4.6 yards per carry. I really thought that these guys did a good job because you can't really ask for much more. They ran the ball with effectiveness. They gave Stafford enough clean pockets to work as a passer. And ultimately, I thought it was a good performance against a very solid defensive line. I mean, you're looking at guys like DeForest Buckner and first-round pick Kwity Paye and some of these other guys. So hats off to them. I thought they did a good job. The one thing that I do want to note that was maybe a concern in this game, you look at Matthew Stafford. He threw a ball, I can't remember at what point in the game, maybe in the third quarter, and on the follow-through, he hit his thumb on the shoulder pad of DeForest Buckner. It reminded me when I just said his name there, and you could see him sort of shaking his hand off, and that may have played a role in how he was throwing the ball for the rest of the game. Ultimately, it could have been one of the reasons maybe he wasn't as sharp in this game as he was in the first game. Don't know for sure, but that definitely could be one of the reasons maybe that he didn't look as good as he did in that first contest, or maybe why he didn't push the ball as deep in this game. Now we can flip to the other side of the ball, the defense, and I want to start with some of these guys up front, man. They had a great performance. They were pressuring Carson Wentz consistently, and they had maybe 5 or 6 sacks that they lost in this game that they probably get against any other quarterback, which is a credit to Carson Wentz because this guy has a lot of mobility, and he's big, and he's strong. He's like 6'5", 240. He can absorb a lot of contact, and he's going to hold on to the ball for as long as possible. But you look at guys like Sebastian Joseph Day registers a sack in that game. Leonard Floyd, a sack of his own where they held the Colts 4 downs on the 1-yard line. They stopped them 4 times, and that was the last play. It was the 4th down attempt by the Colts there to try and throw the ball. Leonard Floyd secures a sack, turnover on downs. You look at Taylor Rapp, half a sack. Greg Gaines, defensive tackle, half a sack. And that one was a little bit funny where there was like 4 or 5 different guys that sacked Wentz at the same time. That was basically a sack by the defense or by the team. Everyone got in on that one, but a solid performance by that defensive line. They were pressuring Carson Wentz a ton. Aaron Donald, according to PFF, 9 pressures in this game. Again, these numbers may change, but he had 3 or 4, I'm talking inches away from sacking this dude. So close. He did not register any, but he affected that game a lot. That was one throwback Aaron Donald performance where he was in the quarterback's lap. It felt like every single snap. And there was other guys like Floyd as well who registered 7 pressures in his own right. So a very, very good performance by that front 7 in general. I thought they did a good job bottling up Jonathan Taylor as well, the Colts running back who we know is one of the best in the NFL. Only 15 rushes for 51 yards, averaged 3.4 yards per carry. That is not good for a guy as talented as he is. You expect more out of him. That's a hats off to that front 7 from the Rams. They did a great job bottling this guy up snap after snap. The one big issue, linebacker Kenny Young in the red zone loses his cool. It was some sort of a snap between him and Quentin Nelson. I'm not really sure what happened there. And he starts going off. I think he actually hit the hat of an official and he got ejected out of the game. Troy Reeder takes over the rest of those snaps and the rest of the game. And then rookie Ernest Jones, 3rd-round pick, comes in and replaces Troy Reeder's linebacker 2 status. So not good by Kenny Young. You need to be a lot more cool in that contest. The team depends on you. I mean, you are the number 1 linebacker on the roster. You need to be able to step up and be that guy consistently. And he had a good game. I mean, like I mentioned, they were stopping Jonathan Taylor consistently. They did a really good job in terms of the running game, at least, not so much in the passing game, but the linebackers weren't the reason for that. And so you got to be a lot more dependable and just calm yourself down a little bit. That was not good. And it gave the Colts, I believe, a 1st down in that red zone. And I do think they ended up scoring on that drive as well, if I'm not mistaken. So just a costly penalty. You got to have a cooler head than that, in my opinion. Moving on to some of these other guys, the secondary in specific, I felt like they were very nonchalant in this game. They just were playing so far off in terms of their coverage, and they just really allowed the Colts to do whatever they wanted in this game. And it gave Carson Wentz a productive contest. It gave the Colts offense a productive offense. And it felt like they were consistently driving up and down the field, sort of like the Bears were. No urgency, it felt like, from these guys, unfortunately. You look at guys like Darius Williams, allow 7 receptions on 11 targets. That is just too much. 57 yards, not that bad. A touchdown, you got to be tighter in your coverage there. 4 first downs, that's a lot of drives being extended. You look at some of these other guys. Jordan Fuller, 5 receptions allowed on 5 targets for 73 yards, 2 first downs. Taylor Rapp, 3 receptions, 50 yards, 2 first downs. Just not a great performance. The one guy that really ate his Wheaties this morning that came to play, Jalen Ramsey. I mean, targeted 4 times, allows 1 reception for 7 yards, and he obviously had the game-sealing or game-winning interception there at the end on Jacob Eason after Carson Wentz got rolled up by Aaron Donald on a near sack. It looked like his ankle nearly snapped. I mean, it was very, very unfortunate, very gross, and they had to substitute Jacob Eason to supplant that last drive. 2.5 minutes left, no timeouts. This guy who's, unexperienced young guy has to now go and play against the Rams. Just probably not going to end well, and it didn't. He overthrew a receiver. It landed right in the hands of Jalen Ramsey. Ramsey starts waving at the fans. Just a great performance by him. I mean, he was active in this game. He was physical like he always is. Nearly got in a fight with Michael Pittman Jr. on one snap, which was interesting to see. Those guys are fiery, so they're going to really let it all out there on the field. But in terms of how they performed, I would say they were about average. This was definitely not their best performance. I'm not really sure if the adjustments are just not being made on that side of the ball right now. It's probably fair to be a little bit concerned about Raheem Morris and how he's calling these games, because this defense has a lot more talent than what they're showing right now. I don't think Carson Wentz should have 250 passing yards. And of course, if the Colts have a little bit better luck in the red zone and they don't get stopped 4 or 7 or 8 times, I think they had 2 red zone trips where they came away with no points. If they don't have these kind of gaffes, what kind of game are we talking about here, right? The Rams may have lost. So, of course, you got to give credit to the Rams defense for making those stops, but you're not going to always make those stops. You want to try to be a little bit more tight in terms of your coverage, a little bit less laid back and bend but don't break style, because then you're just inviting teams to consistently getting into scoring range on you, and that's obviously not the way you want to play defense. We're going to dive into the rest of the performance there, as well as some weird special team stuff in just a second. But before we get there, make sure to keep checking back in here at the Locked On Rams podcast throughout the rest of the week. We're going to continue breaking down this game, and then we're going to dive into the Week 3 contest between the Rams and the Bucks. But before we get there, I want to tell you guys about Direct TV Stream. It's going to make your life a lot easier. You can get all the entertainment that you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. Like I said, it's called Direct TV Stream, and it brings your live TV on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. You don't need to juggle a bunch of different remotes anymore or buy a bunch of different devices. The best part is, too, there is no annual contract, so get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together. All you have to do, just go check out DirecTV Stream at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. And you guys have heard me talk about Built Bar many times on this podcast. They actually just sent me a care package the other day. I want to say 3 days ago now. 6 bars, and I ate all of them in one day. Clearly, I have no willpower and no self-control, but they taste so good. I'm telling you guys, you want to try these bars out. They're absolutely delicious. They have so many different unique flavors that you probably never found in any other protein bar before. They're not like the others that are chalky, super high in calories, very expensive. They're delicious. They're low in calories. They're low in sugar. They have 19 grams of protein per bar. They're high in fiber, and they even work for you on the keto diet. You even get a free cooler with your purchase while the supplies last. All you have to do, just go to BuiltBar.com and use the promo code LOCK15, and you'll get 15% off your next order. Use the promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. If you guys need a little bit of assistance when it comes to betting, and clearly I do because my bets were just terrible this week, go check out the Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. They're going to share all your favorite picks, guys, teams that you should maybe avoid, lines that you should avoid, lines that you like, as well as Lee Sterling's lock of the day. All you have to do, follow the Locked On Bets podcast brought to you by betonline.ag, wherever you get your podcasts. Now we can carry on with the final segment here of this recap between the Rams and the Colts in week 2. And I mentioned some of the weird special teams gaffes. Listen, I've watched football for 20 years at this point, like above 2 decades. I have never seen this happen in an NFL game before, and it happened in this one where Nick Scott, the personal protector, the guy that's closest to the punter on the punt team, he goes in motion and then goes in motion again across the formation, and he doesn't get wide enough. So when the snapper goes to snap the ball, it actually hit Nick Scott's arm, his elbow, and the ball never got to Johnny Hekker. It starts rolling around at the 1, 2, 5 yard line, and the Colts easily scoop and score on what is such a routine play. It gave the Indianapolis Colts 7 points, which we never see from the Rams special teams. This team and this unit in specific is so disciplined, and somehow they allowed that mistake to happen. And of course, they were backed up in their own end zone. So this was just the worst case scenario where when the Colts recover it, they're pretty much in the end zone already. It's a touchdown. So that put the Rams behind in this game. And it was obviously such a boneheaded mistake and kind of random. I don't know who's at fault. I'm going to assume that maybe Nick Scott needs to take another step over. But at the same time, these are the things that you need to clean up. But with that being said, I also think this is a positive because they're now getting rid of some of these silly mistakes and putting that stuff aside, and especially on the special teams aspect of things, because last year the special teams was horrendous, but the Rams still managed to win this game. I mean, the rest of the special teams were not bad. You look at Matt Gay, 3 of 3 on his extra points, 2 of 2 on his field goal attempts. Pretty clean game from him. The punts, not great. 36.3 average from Johnny Hekker. Some of those questions may start to come, whether the Rams should have kept Corey Bojorquez this season. We'll see if that ends up being true or not. But some of the kick returns, Jake Funk finally gets to take a few out. 3 returns, 70 yards, 23.3 average. Nothing crazy, but at the same time, it's good to see him finally get a little bit of action, not really make any big mistakes, no fumbles, anything like that. So that was good as well. The last thing here that I wanted to talk about, the Rams won ugly, right? You're not going to win every game by 30, and everything's not always going to be great like it was in week 1 for the Rams. You're going to make some of these mistakes like they made. They lost a linebacker to an ejection. They lost 4 or 5, maybe 6 sacks that they could have easily gotten in any other given Sunday. You talk about some of the uncharacteristic drops from guys like Robert Woods and Van Jefferson, and the Rams still won this game. They were winning at halftime, by the way, and we know the statistic. Sean McVay was 38-0 when leading at halftime, and going into the fourth quarter, they were losing in this game after that special teams blunder. Of course, the Rams end up winning the game. So now that record is 39-0 when leading at halftime. He extends it another week. And like I said, the Rams were losing in the fourth quarter. So Matthew Stafford, another fourth quarter comeback in his career to add to his numbers, which is great as well. But at the same time, you don't want to put yourself in these positions to where you got to win like this, right? The Rams, if Carson Wentz is in there and not Jacob Eason at the end with those 2.5 minutes, no timeouts, maybe he leads a drive that gets them into field goal range and they tie that game. Or, if the Colts have a little bit better luck in the red zone, maybe they actually win that game. So the Rams have to just do a much better job of playing clean football. But it is a good sign that they went through some of this turmoil early in the season and they still managed to come out not necessarily, just in a win, but nearly 30 points on offense, which is always good. You're basically shooting for 30 points as an offense every game at least. And they win the game, maybe not convincingly, but they win, right? They still got in, took care of business on the road in what was a very ugly performance by the end, not necessarily by the offense or the defense specifically, but when you just put everything together, you're losing guys to ejections, you're doing these silly things on special teams, giving up touchdowns there, you still came away with a win. I think it gives a lot of credit to the Rams that they can find ways to win football games in different ways, because you're not always going to have 50 or 60-yard touchdowns. You're not always going to put up 40 points on offense. You need sometimes to play better defense and have that unit carry you, or you need your offense to score maybe 35 in a game and win, or sometimes you need that special teams to carry you. Those are the mark of good football teams, the ones that can win ugly, and the Rams took care of business in this one, obviously winning 27-24 in what was a relatively ugly game. Now, there is one correction that I want to make on this offensive line here. I've shared some of their pass protection numbers earlier in this episode, and I was looking at both week 1 and week 2 combined. So when we just look at week 2 here, there was only 1 pressure by Austin Corbett, 1 pressure allowed by David Edwards, 1 pressure allowed by Rob Havenstein, 1 pressure allowed by Andrew Whitworth, and only 1 sack in this game, which was allowed by Andrew Whitworth. So a lot better than those actual stats indicated when I said it earlier, because those were the stats for 2 games, not just 1 game. So they did a much better job. And I was kind of wondering why those stats were so high because I thought the offensive line did a much better job than they indicated. So those stats, the ones that I just shared, make a lot more sense. These guys did a lot better of a job than the earlier stats would have indicated. So all in all, a decent game by the Rams. They jump up to 2-0 now. A huge game coming up here against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's not going to be easy. The former Super Bowl champions, they are also 2-0 on this season. It's going to be a good one, though. The Rams are at home now, going back to SoFi Stadium, I believe. And we're going to really find out who this team is this week, because now they will have played 3 playoff teams from the 2020 season. This is not an easy season for the Rams, and so far they look up to it for every single moment. They look like a legitimate playoff team, but that's not going to do it for this game. We're going to continue breaking it down for the next episode or two, so make sure to keep tuning back into the Locked On Rams podcast. Going to dive into some of the in-depth numbers as well as the remaining topics in this game, and then we'll flip the page going into the preview for that Week 3 contest. Of course, you guys can always come connect with us on Twitter at QBsMEP and at Locked On Rams, and on YouTube at Locked On Rams. Please subscribe or follow to get our latest episodes, content, breaking news, and a whole lot more.